Michelle Bloodworth is our moderator for the final panel discussion titled Natural Gas Generating Our Nation's Power and Fueling Manufacturing. Michelle currently serves as Senior Director of Power Generation at America's Natural Gas Alliance. In this role, Ms. Bloodworth works with ANGA's State Affairs Committees, as well as utilities, regulators, legislators, and other business-to-business stakeholders to communicate the economic and environmental benefits of natural gas and increased demand in the power generation, industrial transportation, and export markets. Her experience in the natural gas industry includes strategic planning, business development, sales and marketing, pipeline and supply project management, research and development, communications, economic development, and government affairs. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Auburn University and is a registered industrial and commercial gas consultant, and one of my favorite people to work with. Please welcome Michelle Bloodworth.
Well, I am so glad for the dedicated people who I cannot see. Now I know what Pam has been dealing with the light. But I am Michelle Bloodworth. As Pam said, I'm Senior Director of Power Generation for America's Natural Gas Alliance. And what I wanted to do before I start off my panel, since I know when Pam Roth with WPX closes for today, she's not going to thank herself. But one of the things that makes ANGA a great organization is really the members that we have. I spent a lot of time working for one of our member companies, and I came to work for ANGA because of people like Pam Roth, who I respect so much. But I want everybody, because to put this conference on takes a lot of hard work. She is the most dedicated, the most passionate person that I have ever met, and has made my job at ANGA truly exciting and fun. So let's give Pam a round of applause. I have had the pleasure to participate in all of ANGA's Think About It Energy Summit series. We started off with our first one in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. We had our second one in Ohio, and now we have our last one for the year in Colorado. And I will have to say, since I'm here in the great state of Colorado, that we by far, for this conference, have had outstanding panelists. I am extremely honored to moderate the panel, such an important panel on power generation and manufacturing, with all of the esteemed panelists, which you will see behind me. And so I tried to think of a way that I could keep everybody awake at the end of a very long day. And so I decided the way I would keep you awake is, if you haven't already noticed, I do have a Southern accent. Not from Southern Colorado, but I'll let you guess at the end of my presentation where I am from and where I live. One of the reasons that ANGA wanted to host these Think About It Energy Summit series is to really have a candid discussion about natural gas, about the opportunities, but also about the challenges and the issues, and how we continue to take advantage of the economic, environmental, and energy security benefits of natural gas. For those of you who may not be familiar with ANGA, we represent the independent natural gas exploration and production companies. I'm very honored to have many of those companies in the room today who operate in the great state of Colorado and throughout the United States and actually throughout the world. So very appreciative of their presence. One of the areas that ANGA really does believe, related to the panelists you're going to hear from today, is we really do feel like there are significant opportunities to take advantage of natural gas in the power generation and the manufacturing sector. What really differentiates, there are a lot of natural gas alliances in the United States, but what really differentiates ANGA is we're focused on natural gas demand, really looking for opportunities to increase the use of this precious product in the areas of power generation, industrial/manufacturing, the transportation market. Had a really good panel prior to this one. And then we're also supportive of LNG exports. You're going to hear a lot that this trend related to power generation and manufacturing is already happening. Many of the panelists, including Governor Hickenlooper and our CEO, Marty Durbin, already spoke to it. According to as we look at the Colorado Energy Office, natural gas makes up about 27% of the overall electricity within your own state is generated from natural gas. That is up from about 20% in 2011. And hopefully we'll hear from our panelists, and hopefully that number will continue to grow. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, natural gas is the largest source of Colorado's overall energy consumption, with coal coming in at number 2. As we look to the future through 2040, primarily most of the generation that's going to be installed is going to be natural gas and renewables. About 63% of all the generation is expected to come from natural gas. Of course, that is because natural gas is not only the most efficient, it's also the least cost, it's the easiest to develop, and it has significant environmental advantages. As we look at the manufacturing sector, there's been a lot of new announcements. Everybody talks about this manufacturing renaissance. The American Chemistry Council has identified about 124 projects. That may not sound like a lot, but an investment of about $83 billion will be invested will be invested between 2010 and over the next decade. There are many that feel like those numbers are extremely conservative. Hopefully we're going to hear from a manufacturer on this panel. As it relates to direct jobs and indirect jobs, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, our industry is probably, the manufacturing sector is going to see about 1 million jobs by 2025. I think many of you are aware of the environmental advantages of natural gas and the power generation sector. Of course, it has 50% less carbon emissions. You already heard from Governor Hickenlooper, from a particulate, from NOx to sulfur dioxide. It does not have any mercury. So that's where you're really seeing many utilities, including Xcel, who is on this panel today, who is moving to more natural gas in the power generation sector. Probably the number one question that I get as I speak throughout the United States is really related to volatility. You know, have the market fundamentals changed so dramatically that we're not going to see? I've been in the natural gas industry for almost 25 years. I did work and have always tried to sell natural gas during those 25 years, and I can tell you it was a lot harder to do at $14 than it is today. But the market fundamentals and the shale gas revolution has really created a new paradigm as it relates to price stability. We really do expect, and it's not just ANGA, from EIA to ICF to Bentech to many of the analysts, really do predict that prices are going to be in that $4 to $6 range, which really makes decisions as it relates to long-term decisions, whether you're a manufacturer looking to spend billions overseas or in the United States, or whether you're a power generator who's looking to make a 40-year investment. That decision is much easier today than it has been in the past. So today what our panelists are going to cover is to really talk about how natural gas combined cycle units, most people think of those in peaking applications. It is our opinion that natural gas can really provide more intermediate to baseload fuel. Our panelists are going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about how combined cycle generation is supporting renewable development, how manufacturers are really benefiting either from the use of natural gas, whether you're a steel, glass, or pulp and paper in a process use, or to really expand based on new markets really for the oil and gas industry, or really products that this manufacturing renaissance is creating. And then also, it's great to have all that abundant supply and reliable pricing, but we're also going to hear about the importance and all of the great expansion on the midstream side. We've got to make sure that we can get the natural gas, whether that's a manufacturing or a residential customer or for a power generation load. We have to be able to transport that throughout the United States. I'm going to go ahead, since we have 4 esteemed panelists, and introduce each of our panelists. They will speak in the order in which I introduce them, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. We have Luke Jackson, who is an energy analyst from Bentek Energy. He is a West Energy analyst on the company's North America Natural Gas Analytics team. He does cover supply and demand fundamentals in the Rockies and the Southwest and the Pacific and Northwest regions. We have been very honored to have Bentek present at all of our gas utilization conferences and really provided a lot of informative information on that midstream and also supply side. Our next panelist will be Frank Prager, who is Vice President of Environmental and Public Policy at Xcel Energy. Frank is responsible for advancing Xcel's public policy and ensuring that the company's policy positions create value for the corporation and, most importantly, to the customers in which they serve. His organization designs and advocates for federal and state policies related to a number of utility issues, including the environment, air quality, climate change, renewable energy rates, which are very important to all of you in the room, and also state and federal regulations, and also the transmission side. We're also really honored from Virginia to have Claire Phibbs, who is manager of the economic value and the thermal product marketing for GE and water. She's really going to talk about how I think many of us forget we talk about innovation and technology as it relates to drilling in the E&P industry, but she's really going to touch on the advancements from turbine technology on the turbine side and also from the generation side, how many advancements have been made. She has a tremendous amount of industry experience with electric power markets, power generation asset operation, and electric power trading. Her current role focuses on project evaluation of power plant assets, really helping power plant owners know the type of equipment, a lot of the important decisions as it relates to the land, the air, and the water. She spends a lot of time throughout the United States. And then finally, we're going to hear from a manufacturer, Paul Harder, who is president and CEO of AquaHot Heating Systems, and board member of the Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association. He had joined AquaHot in 2006, where he helped reorganize the company, really improving quality control and facilitating the diversification of their company. He was named president in January of 2010. He has spent a lot of time, and he's going to speak to this today, really developing new products, exciting. His business has expanded by leaps and bounds. So with that, I'm going to let our first panelist, Justin, will speak to us now.
Yeah, sure. You want to go ahead? Got the wrong deck up here. Give us a second. There we are. All right, well, first off, thank you, Michelle, and then I also just want to extend a quick thank you to Paul Smith and really the rest of ANGA. We appreciate you giving Bentek the opportunity to come out and participate at this year's event. Folks, I know a lot of you have been here for quite some time, and your attention spans are probably pretty low at the moment, so I promise I try to make my presentation a little more entertaining, exciting, easy to follow along. And if you can bear with me, I think there's some important stuff that you guys will be able to take away from today's deck. Like Michelle said, my name is Luke Jackson. I'm an energy analyst with Bentech Energy. My focus really is the western U.S. natural gas market, so essentially the Rockies and everything west of it, up along and down California and up the Pacific Northwest. And what I'm going to do today is provide a brief update on what's going on kind of within the U.S., but also more specifically what's going on within the Rockies natural gas market. For those of you who don't know who we are, Bentech Energy is an energy analytics shop. We're actually based just down the street in downtown Denver. We're a subsidiary of McGraw-Hill and Platts. And so what we do, we're essentially collecting data, analyzing data, and turning that data into meaningful information for the energy industry. That comes in the form of different reports. We do a lot of consulting work. We also issue a number of white papers. And our clients range anything from producers, marketers, end users, to different pipelines, utilities, a number of financial trading, private equity shops are also clients. And then a small percentage are different government entities like the FERC. But as I like to say, at the core of it, we really are a bunch of data nerds, including myself. There's a couple other analysts from Bentech here as well. I'm sure they would attest to the same thing. We're really sitting at our computers all day looking at numbers and turning those numbers into something meaningful for our clients. A few things to take away from today's presentation. One, U.S. dry gas production is continuing to grow across the U.S. Recently, actually just this past weekend, production actually hit a new high in the U.S., up near 66 BCF per day. So production is growing and will continue to grow the next 5 years, due in large part to the associated gas that we're getting from oil and NGL-directed drilling. In terms of Rockies production, that is down, has trended down the past 4 or 5 years, though we do expect that to come back and increase as we begin to see slightly higher gas prices and also higher NGL prices. In terms of regional gas demand within the Rockies, that has actually trended down as well within the past 4 to 5 years, due in large part to the growth of renewables generation, in particular wind. However, there is some upside to our forecast for gas within the region, gas demand within the Rockies. There are some coal retirements, a number of new gas projects that are getting built, and so there's some opportunity for demand growth for the Rockies. And then finally, with our forecast for rising production and relatively stagnant to up demand, we do believe the Rockies will continue to rely on outflows to balance, meaning because they produce so much supply and because demand is relatively stagnant, they will need to send gas out to other regions in order to balance that market. So as I said, U.S. production is growing, albeit slower this year than in previous years, but nevertheless continues to increase. So just to recap, in 2009, the U.S. was producing about 55.3 BCF per day of natural gas. That jumped up in 2010, and then again in 2011, we saw the big jump when production grew about 4.5 BCF per day, while production has leveled off in 2012, and then again in 2013, we continue to see production grow, a lot of that focused in the Northeast and the Marcellus, also now in the Utica. And so right year to date, we've produced about 65 BCF per day. And through the end of the year, we're expecting production to average right around there, 65.5 BCF per day. And just to give you guys an idea of some of the year-on-year change in production growth, as I noted, 2011 was the big jump, and then in 2012 and 2013, production has leveled off, but nevertheless is still continuing to grow. Our forecast is calling for continued production growth. About 14.5 BCF per day increase is what we're expecting through the end of 2018. The gains that we're going to see the next few years, and really even throughout the next 5 years, will be driven in large part by the associated gas that we are getting from oil and NGL-directed production. But in the out years, 2015 to 2018, stronger demand, gas demand within the power sectors and the industrial sectors, but also higher gas prices we believe will help increase drilling in some of our more dry gas plays that currently are uneconomic to drill in at current gas prices. On the demand side across the U.S., power burn, we believe will continue to drive demand growth. Interestingly, this year we actually seen a drop off in power demand, which is down about 3 BCF per day. That's in large part because in the summer of 2012, last summer, we actually had very low natural gas prices, and that incentivized some coal to gas switching. So power plants were switching away from coal as a generation source, and we're switching to natural gas because it was so cheap. This year, we've actually seen a switch back. With the higher gas prices, power plants are switching back towards coal as a generation source, and as a result, burned less gas. However, a number of coal retirements, a number of new gas plants that are getting built across the U.S., we believe that gas demand from the power sector will grow about 5.5 BCF per day between now and the end of 2018. Then also from the industrial sector, we're anticipating about 2.5 BCF per day increase in industrial demand. And I'll show you why here. A number of industrial expansions are planned across the United States. The bulk of those, as you can see from the map, are focused in the Northeast as well as the Southeast. We're following about over 100 projects in both regions. If you look at the Rockies, currently we're only following about 9 industrial projects in that region. Some of those include a steel plant up in Montana. There's also a power plant that will be serving some mining facilities in Utah. But we're not seeing nearly the industrial expansions out west that we do out east, just due in large part because of the population centers on the East Coast and also the transportation network out there have allowed for more industrial growth in the eastern United States. But as I said, in the Rockies, about 9 projects we're following. Assuming all those came online, we're estimating incremental gas demand from those projects at about 60 million cubic feet per day. And then across the U.S., if all 400 projects that we're following were to go forward, we're talking about an incremental close to 8 BCF per day of new gas demand from the industrial sector alone. But as I noted on the previous slide, we're only anticipating about 2.5 BCF per day increase, and that's just simply because we don't expect all these 400 projects to move forward. A good estimate would be about half of those, which would get you into the number you saw on the previous slide. In terms of prices, as Michelle touched on, we expect prices to remain relatively flat the next 5 years. We're anticipating gas prices to average between $4 and $5. We're currently a little bit below the current NYMEX forward curve, just due in large part to the sustained production growth that we're expecting across the U.S. A few factors will limit the upside to that price at the $4.55 mark. One is cap coal, which is Central Appalachian coal. So as I touched on, when gas prices start to get high, we believe you will begin to see a switch back towards gas-fired generation. That will keep a kind of a cap on prices at the $5 range. And likewise, at $4.55, a lot of dry gas plays that, again, are currently uneconomic to drill in at current gas prices should become more economic and allow for some increased production, keeping prices down. And then similarly, providing some price support at the $3.54 mark is the industrial demand, the gas-fired generation demand that I noted, but also LNG exports, which will begin to move forward in 2016 and 2017. That will provide some price support as well. And then finally, MATS. That's the Mercury, Air, and Toxic Standards, the rule proposed, put forth by the EPA, will ultimately make coal-fired generation, in our view, more expensive because of the emissions requirements that rule enforces. So that's a little on the U.S. side of things. Switching gears and switching to Rockies production. On the Rockies side, as I know at the beginning, has trended down the past 4 to 5 years. It peaked in 2009 at about 9.8 BCF per day when the REX pipeline came online. But since then, it's down about a BCF per day. A lot of those declines, again, in our more dry gas plays, and I'll show you that here in a second. And so year to date, we're producing about 8.7 BCF per day of gas across the Rockies. So it's the dry gas plays, as I noted, in the region where we're seeing declines. You can see here from this bar chart, the bars in the red represent those basins where we're seeing production declines since the beginning of 2011. So you can see the San Juan, the Green River, also the Piceance are all down about 0.3 BCF per day in the past 2 years. And the only play in the Rockies where we're seeing some growth is the Denver-Julesburg Basin, which is up about 0.2, with a lot of those gains driven by the associated gas that we're getting from that oil-directed drilling out there. We do expect production to come back the next 5 years through 2018. Right now we're forecasting an increase about 0.4 BCF per day, with a lot of those gains again be driven by the growth in the DJ Basin, which we're expecting to increase about 0.6. The Green River also, we expect to come back with some higher gas prices and higher NGL prices. The Piceance, we're anticipating will decrease about 0.4, though there is some upside there as well. The Uinta, flat to up. And then also the Powder River Basin, we anticipate will fall about 0.3 BCF per day. In terms of Rockies demand, as I noted at the beginning, it's trended down the past 4 or 5 years, though there is some upside moving forward. Looking strictly at Rockies residential commercial demand and Rockies industrial demand, as I said, fairly flat. Since 2009, it's actually fallen about 0.1 BCF per day. Those declines really focused in the industrial sector, that due in large part to the economic downturn when the economy went down in 2009. So on the whole, industrial rescom demand flat to down in the region. The big story is power burn. Rockies power burn has also actually declined despite progressively warmer summers the past couple of years. So you look at it here, this is a graph of our Rockies power burn, and you can see in 2009 we were burning about 0.4 BCF per day. And in 2013, that number is down to about 0.2, 0.3 BCF per day. And if you look at these charts here on the bottom, for example, the one on the bottom left, that represents our Rockies temperature departure from normal. So you can see in the summer of 2009, the temperatures in the summer were actually below normal, yet that was when we had our strongest burn. And if you move over to the right in the summer of 2012, then even again in the summer of 2013, temperatures have actually been hotter and above normal, yet we're seeing lower power burn. And I like this next slide because it actually sums up this previous slide even better and kind of gives you a clearer picture of that relationship. So these are a burn per degree chart. So essentially it gives you an idea of how much Rockies gas is getting burned at different temperature levels. So on the far right there, and when you have an average temperature of about 60 degrees or upwards of 80 degrees, when it's warmer, you're burning more gas. And likewise, when you have cooler temperatures, down near 0 degrees or 20 degrees on the left, you're also going to be burning more gas. But this is your burn per degree line in 2010. Here's your burn per degree line in 2011, your burn per degree line in 2012, and then the burn per degree line in 2013. So it's been on a considerable downward trend. At the same exact temperature levels, we're actually burning less gas in the region. And the big reason for that is because of wind. It continues to capture market share and take some away of that market share from gas. This just looks at our gas generation versus our wind generation. Gas is in the red line, wind generation in the blue. And you can see as gas has trended down since the beginning of 2008, our wind generation has increased from about 500 gigawatt hours per month up to about 1,000 gigawatt hours per month in 2013. But the big story in terms of the Rockies and natural gas demand is that coal is still king in the Rockies. It accounts for the bulk of the generation, power generation, because of the cheap, abundant supplies of Powder River Basin coal up to the north and up in Wyoming. So this here is just a generation stack, and it gives you an idea just how much coal generation is going on. And you can see coal accounts for over 70% of the generation stack within the Rockies region. If you look at gas generation, as I said, it's been on a downward trend, down from about 12% in 2008 to 9% in 2013 year to date. There is some hydro generation within the Rockies, which is fairly flat. And the other story is the wind generation, which you can see has increased from about 3% of the generation stack in 2008 up to 8% so far in 2013. You look at this slide, it's a little complicated to follow along, so I issue these nerd alerts every once in a while in my presentations, not only to wake you guys up, but also because I know we're looking at data a lot throughout the day, and these slides can be fairly difficult to follow along. We think they're pretty straightforward, but I know the audience might be a little less straightforward, so bear with me. I think there's some important things that you can take away from this if you follow along with me. So as I said, Powder River Basin coal really accounts for the bulk of the generation, and because it's so cheap and has a low delivered cost, it's going to be difficult for gas to gain significant strides within the Rockies region. So essentially what this slide looks at is your cost competitiveness of coal relative to gas, and gives you an idea of how much potential coal to gas switching that you might see at different gas prices. So what we've broken out here in the bars, or the shaded area there, is our Powder River Basin deliveries, coal deliveries to power plants by price, and we've also broken out our Uinta Coal Basin deliveries to power plants and by price. I should note that along the x-axis there, along our delivered cost of coal, we've converted that, which is usually measured in dollars per short tons, to dollars per MMBTU, so that we're comparing apples to apples with gas. And likewise, on your y-axis there, we've converted our quantity of coal delivered to power plants from short tons to BCF per day, again, so that we're comparing apples to apples with gas. And so what you can see here is in October, our 2013 October Henry Hub price has averaged about $3.70. And so what we're saying here is that essentially everything with a delivered cost greater than $3.70 could potentially get pushed out of the market by gas. But as you can tell, everything to the right of $3.70, or everything with a greater delivered cost higher than $3.70, there's not a lot of much you're pushing out of the market. So what it's going to take is essentially something at around gas price at about $3, really even less, before you begin to push out, potentially push out any coal out of the market. So at a price of $3, you can see you're just beginning to push out about a BCF per day or more of Powder River Basin coal and Uinta coal out of the market. But the big thing, folks, it's going to be very difficult for gas to make significant strides, as I noted, because coal, in particular Powder River Basin coal, is so cheap and has such a low delivered cost to power plants in the region. However, there are some coal retirements in the region, as I noted. Right now, there's about 760 megawatts of coal plants that are getting retired, and there is some new gas plants that are getting built across the Rockies as well, in total about 820 megawatts. But the big story is the wind generation growth, which there's estimated about 2,700 megawatts of new capacity in the Rockies region. So while we do anticipate some gas growth as it helps offset the coal retirements, we also believe gas will need to provide that backup power for the new incremental wind generation that's moving forward. And so that leads us to our forecast for Rockies gas demand. Right now, gas demand within the past 5 years has averaged about 1.9 BCF per day, split between the power, industrial, and rescom sectors. And we do anticipate the next 5 years that gas will grow to about 2.1 BCF per day. So modest gains in the region, not a lot, again, because of the coal generation dominating the power generation stack. But however, as these new gas plants come online, some coal retirements go off, then as gas provides this backup power for the intermittent nature of wind, we do believe that we'll see some gas demand increases in the region in the next 5 years. So ultimately, what that means for the Rockies is that we'll continue to rely on outflows. It'll need to send more gas out of the region because there's not enough demand within the region locally. And we believe a lot of that gas will be going to Western markets out in California, down in the Southwest, also up into the Pacific Northwest. And you can see that trend already happening from that red graph there. You can see outflows to Western markets have increased, due in part not only to demand growth within the West, but also due to the pushback out of the Eastern markets. And that's represented by these outflows in the green there. You have a lot of growth in the Northeast. You also have some growth in the Bakken, also down in the Anadarko. So a lot less Rockies gas is going to Eastern markets, and more is going west. As you can see, about 53% is going west in 2013 versus only 40% a few years ago. And then similarly, our forecast is calling for further increases in outflows to Western markets. By 2018, we're expecting about just under 60% of Rockies gas to be moving west. So that's all that I have. I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to hand it back to Frank. Thank you.
Well, Luke did a great job, and a lot of, maybe I'm a nerd and I like that kind of stuff, but one of the interesting things that you saw there is he talked a lot about how wind and gas are working together in the electric utility sector in particular. I want to talk about how we're viewing those specific issues. And if you come away with anything from my presentation, I'd like you to think about this. Number one is that gas is going to be king and wind is going to be king for utility generation in the future. It's just a reality. Number two is a lot of that is driven by public policy. Public policy is really the thing that's making that happen right And number three is that the policy developments that we have in the future are going to play an important role in determining how we're able to provide reliable and reasonably priced electricity going forward. I'm proud of what we've done at Xcel Energy. We've done a lot of really remarkable things at Xcel Energy to try to encourage people to make better use of their energy and to find ways to provide people with energy at a very low price. And I'll be able to show you some of that here. But at the same time, we're making real progress in a lot of the big environmental challenges we face. And natural gas plays an important role in that. In fact, natural gas plays a central role in the future of this industry. So let me start with a little bit of propaganda about Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy is a public utility holding company. We're headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but we serve here Denver and the Front Range through our public service company and Colorado affiliate. Also serve the Texas Panhandle and eastern New Mexico. I have to tell an accent story that's similar to the one Michelle was telling earlier. We used to have a terrific guy. Olin Plunk was our VP of Environmental Services about 10 years ago. He was testifying at the U.S. Senate, and he was from Amarillo, so he's from our Amarillo affiliate. He got up and he began his testimony by saying, Mr. Chairman, my name is Olin Plunk, and I am Vice President of Environmental Services for Xcel Energy, a public utility holding company headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Hillary Clinton was on that committee at that time, Environment and Public Works, and she turned to Senator Carper, and he piped up and said, Mr. Plunk, are you from southern Minnesota by any chance? Which is almost exactly the same joke that you just told. So. But I like that story. Xcel Energy is the nation's #1 wind provider. We've got more wind connected to our system than any other utility. We also are #5 in the utility solar capacity, and I spend half my day-to-day dealing with issues associated with net metering, an issue unto itself, which I won't talk about today, but certainly happy to answer questions. We have a lot of energy efficiency and conservation, serve 1.9 million gas customers. Don't want to lose track of that, especially in a crowd of folks who provide natural gas. We do serve natural gas here in Colorado, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing here, but we also serve 3.4 million electric customers. Pretty amazing story about Xcel Energy. Since 2005, we are on track to reduce our emissions by 31% by 2020, our greenhouse gas emissions. CO2 emissions are coming down, and they're coming down for 3 reasons. Number one is we are implementing a lot of energy efficiency and conservation programs across our system, which means that our customers are using less energy. Number two is we're adding a lot of wind energy to our system, and that is reducing emissions by reducing our fossil generation. And number three is we are retiring coal plants. In fact, we implemented a program in Minnesota several years ago called the Minnesota Emission Reduction Program. That resulted in the retirement of 2 large coal plants within the Twin City area. We're doing something similar here, and I think Governor Hickenlooper spoke about that earlier today, the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act. I'll talk in more detail about that. But those are the three ways that we're going about reducing our carbon dioxide emissions, and they're very important to keep in mind. Come back to them again by the end of this presentation because they really are a blueprint for how the nation can address climate going forward in a way that makes sense from an economic point of view. And it really is important that we do that. I'm very proud that Xcel Energy has not only reduced its emissions, but it's maintained a reasonably priced product. In fact, right now, despite all the emission reductions we've made, our energy prices remain at or below the national average in all of our companies. And we've done that at a time when we've seen significant run-ups in electric prices throughout the country, but we've been able to maintain a low-cost electric supply because of low-priced natural gas, because of low-priced wind, and because of our efforts to try to make sure that we always keep that balance in mind. Diversity of fuel portfolio is extremely important in utility planning, just as it is with any other portfolio, whether it's your 401k or the way that the government handles things. It's very important to have a diverse fuel portfolio. It's very important that we not become too dependent on any one energy resource. And I think we've been very successful in doing that, which is reflected here in these electricity rates. So here's our challenge right now. We have 3 basic challenges. The first is that load is not growing. For years, we used to believe that load would grow, especially here in a high growth place like Colorado, by 3 or 4% a year. Then it declined to 2, and then it declined. Now it's down about 1. We're really not seeing the kind of load growth we've seen in the past. Still not exactly sure why that is. In part, that may be because of the recession that we're still not completely over, and that we're not seeing the kind of return of business activity that we've seen in the past. But more likely, it's because of a couple of other things. One is public policy. And public policy has changed our load profile, both from our DSM and energy efficiency programs as well as net metering. But the second piece to it is the change in the way that our customers are using energy. And you can see here these three examples. An old desktop computer used to use 450 kilowatt hours a year of energy. A laptop uses 210, so already it's been more than half. But look at a tablet. It only uses 13 kilowatt hours a year of electricity. Darn it. That was a joke. The electricity used by our customers is going down because of structural and technological changes in the economy. Second thing, though, is that environmental regulations and environmental requirements are transforming electric generation. We heard earlier about the MATS rule. That's changing things dramatically, and it's forcing us into a position where we're seeing a lot of coal plant retirements across the nation. But it also is right now we're in a position where it's going to be more and more difficult to add new coal to the system, driving us more to natural gas and then ultimately to renewables. And finally, that is actually the important factor that we're seeing, is that there just isn't a legal or a reasonable economic opportunity to add new generation options. I understand your lunch speaker today was a very interesting guy and was a real big advocate of nuclear. I'll tell you that if I went to my CEO tomorrow and said, boss, we should build a new nuclear plant, I would be a former vice president of environmental policy and service. Nuclear is a bet the company option, although some folks like Southern Company have taken a shot at it. It is very expensive, and in an environment where you have low-priced natural gas options and a long-term gas curve that looks pretty good, it's a very, very difficult option for anyone to adopt. So let me talk about natural gas. Obviously, shale gas has changed the game for electric utilities. It adds more flexibility to our system and allows us now to use gas for more than just its prior, what it was used for previously, which is a bridge fuel or a fuel that we use primarily for intermediate or peaking, although we still use it for that. Now we're seeing more and more across the system use of natural gas as a base load fuel. We also see significant environmental benefits. You have less than half of the CO2 associated with a coal plant generator you have with a natural gas combined cycle plant. No CO2, no SO2, no sulfur dioxide, and 80% less oxides of nitrogen. We also have a lower capital commitment. And remember, I mentioned a moment ago about nuclear. Power companies already are the highest and most capital-intensive industry out there. Adding a lot of additional capital really puts great pressure on rates, especially at a time when our customers are using less. Having a lower capital investment to make is really a good thing ultimately from a rate perspective. And that's the great thing about natural gas, is it has lower capital costs associated with it. And finally, it increases system flexibility in order to enable us to bring new renewable energy online. But remember, it does displace natural gas at the same, renewables do displace natural gas at the same time, meaning that the more natural gas you have in the system, the more renewables you can bring on and maybe the less natural gas you use. It's one of the ironies of it. I will say that for our local distribution company for natural gas, we are making significant investments right now in our natural gas system in order to improve the reliability and the safety of the system. Our goal, as always, is to enhance the value for our gas customers, especially our industrial customers, because they're the ones who depend on natural gas for employment and economics. We obviously need to bring gas for heating to people's homes. But overall, we believe right now that our natural gas distribution system is just like our electric system, undergoing a period of transformation. And it's going to be important for us to be able to deliver value to our customers during this period of low gas prices. Let me talk about natural gas as a power generation resource in the context of environmental regulation. Natural gas is coming online for three basic reasons. One is the price is low. The second is we're actually at a point in time where a lot of these aging coal plants are really approaching the end of their lives. And the third is these EPA regulatory requirements, especially the mercury and air toxic standards. The mercury and air toxic standards are really the pivot point that we see across the nation right now, because they're forcing utilities to make a decision. Do I keep running a 50-year-old coal plant, or do I invest in a new natural gas plant? Now that decision is a lot different if gas is at $8 than if gas is at $3. And right now, that's really the big driver on the coal plant retirements across the nation. And you can see from this chart, the level of coal plant and gas plant megawatt hours produced is changing dramatically from 2008 to 2012. You've seen a 40% increase in natural gas-fired generation and almost a 25% reduction in coal. That's going to continue. We expect to see 65 megawatts or more of gas-fired generation to retire by 2015 in order to comply with MATS. Sorry, coal-fired generation. Well, let me turn to the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act, because the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act was our effort here in Colorado to get out in front of what was coming and what we saw coming both in environmental regulation and changes in the marketplace. It really grew out of the fact that we recognized there was a significant pressure coming on us to reduce emissions from our coal-fired power plants, especially here in the Denver metropolitan area. We also knew that coming around the corner was climate regulation and the need to reduce carbon dioxide in order to address future climate requirements that are, in fact, coming now. So we started working with the natural gas industry, with the governor's office and Jim Carpenter, working for Governor Ritter at that time. We also met with the environmental community, with the Department of Public Health and Environment here in Colorado, and we put together a plan that began with legislation and led to a hearing in front of the Public Utilities Commission and ultimately in front of the Air Quality Control Commission. It was designed to meet current and reasonably foreseeable requirements, which for us really focused on ozone and regional haze, which are two big issues here in Colorado. But we also took into account the risk of carbon dioxide regulation. The bill that was passed included some cost recovery provisions and some air quality planning provisions, which were very important to making sure not only it made economic sense for us and our customers, but also that it made sense from the point of view of the environment. It allowed the PUC to approve a long-term natural gas contract, and that's a very important issue. We wanted to make sure, because of the historic volatility of natural gas, that we had the ability to hedge against the future price run-ups that may be associated with natural gas. This bill actually encouraged the PUC to approve those long-term gas prices, and importantly from our perspective, not second-guess us if in the end gas prices were lower than the long-term natural gas contract that we entered into. So we proposed and had approved an emission reduction plan. It required us to repower 902 megawatts of coal-fired generation here in the Denver metropolitan area. We have already retired 2 of our coal units. We still have 3 to go. The 2 that we've retired are Cherokee 1 and 2. We're going to retire Cherokee 3 and then replace those 3 units with natural gas combined cycle. We will retain Cherokee 4 as a natural gas boiler, but that unit will probably not run at all except in peak periods where we absolutely need the power because it's going to be so expensive. As a coal unit designed to burn coal, it's not a very efficient unit at that point. We are retrofitting 952 megawatts of coal with emission controls, so we are keeping coal as part of the system. It's important to have that balance. That plan has been approved by the Public Utilities Commission, CDPHE, and EPA, so it's part of the law right now. Litigation with the coal folks continues. They were not terribly pleased with this bill, but we are moving forward, and we think it makes sense for our customers. And it's done. It is a plan that we propose that actually, based on the analysis we did at the time, and certainly in retrospect, now that we see the lower natural gas prices that have resulted, we believe it's much more cost-effective for our customers than the alternative. Let me turn to wind, if I could, really quickly. Wind is an extraordinarily valuable energy resource, and it does reduce our emissions and regulatory risk going forward, especially for carbon dioxide. It is practical to integrate wind on our system at very high levels that we could not have imagined before. Right now, we are at over 2,000 megawatts of wind in Colorado, and we just had approved by the Public Utilities Commission adding another 450 megawatts by the end of the year. The driving factor on that is the production tax credit, which is a federal incentive for wind. Once that's gone, then wind will go up in price. It won't go up in price as far as it has in the past because wind is getting cheaper and better. But it still will go up in price, so we wanted to get that wind on our system now for our customers and for their benefit. We are looking very much at trying to find ways to integrate more wind. We use sophisticated wind forecasting technologies. Our system flexibility, which is enhanced by natural gas, is helping us with that. And also policies, such as a tax credit we've proposed that I was talking with Michelle out in the lobby. It's a consumer renewable credit that actually encourages utilities to bring more wind onto the system and find ways to integrate it. Those are all important pieces of our ability to bring wind on at the levels we're looking at. Let me then, if I could, take the last couple of slides to talk about the biggest challenge that we face going forward, and that is climate change. The Supreme Court in 2007 granted EPA the authority to regulate CO2 under the Clean Air Act. In President Obama's first term, Congress attempted to pass climate legislation but failed. So the president has now turned to the Clean Air Act as the primary vehicle for the regulation of CO2, and his focus is both on new and existing power plants. Right now, EPA has proposed carbon standards for new power plants that essentially are based on the emission rate associated with natural gas combined cycle. They've reproposed these recently, and they've added in the concept of carbon capture and sequestration for coal plants, but especially with gas prices where they are, there is nobody out there who will, except for Southern Company, who will propose a coal plant that has capture and sequestration. It's just too expensive given the marketplace. We've actually looked at IGCC, which is a integrated gasification combined cycle plant, which would have enabled us to do that here in Colorado. Too much money, can't do it. So effectively, EPA, through this regulation, is banning the construction of new coal plants. We don't think that's a particularly good idea, although we have no plans to build a new coal plant just because we think of that fuel diversity issue is so important. But the real game begins now, and that is EPA is beginning to develop regulations for existing power plants, which through a series of steps will take effect finally when state plans are submitted to EPA in June of 2016. Our perspective is pretty simple. We've done a lot to reduce our emissions, and we think EPA should recognize the efforts that we've already taken to reduce our emissions as it develops these plans. So EPA's regulations should be credible, they should be legally defensible and reasonable. It's very important that we not go off the deep end with these regulations. We think EPA has certain limits on its authority under the Clean Air Act. Once that's done, however, the Clean Air Act contemplates that state plans for reduction of carbon dioxide will be the place where the reductions actually occur, and that states will have enormous flexibility in order to reduce their emissions. And so we think that EPA should give states leeway to build their own reduction plans that make sense, using things like energy efficiency and conservation, like renewable energy, and like emission reduction programs such as the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act. Also, by the way, could use things like cap and trade programs such as they have in California, or anything else, frankly. Anything that reduces emissions, the states should be able to take credit for. It makes sense and allows the nation to reduce carbon dioxide emissions in a way that will ultimately result in a cleaner environment and at lower cost. And very important from our perspective, the work that's already been done, the reductions that have already been achieved need to be credited under this program. So that's where we are. Natural gas is a big part of our overall picture and a big part of the balanced portfolio that we're trying to use in order to serve our customers going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Good afternoon. Again, thank you for having me. My name is Claire Phibbs. I'm with GE Power and Water, and hopefully we can get the presentation up. Perfect. All right, so what I was going to talk about was a couple of different points with how natural gas pertains to the power industry. I think Frank and I must have unconsciously coordinated our slides because there's going to be a little bit of overlap, so I may skip a few here and there. But first of all, just to highlight this picture here, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, is the GE's new Flex Efficiency 60 power plant. This is kind of what we view as the wave of the future in terms of natural gas combined cycle technology, and I'll talk about where that technology is headed and why we think it's so important to the power grid today. So starting with how gas pertains to the power industry, I think in general there used to be this old philosophy. 5-10 years ago, the view was that gas was a bridge fuel. It was going to take us from our current situation of being primarily a coal generating fleet, and it was going to be that lever to move us on to being purely renewables. And a lot of that was, well, it's a very volatile price, right? In 2008, the price was $13, $15 for natural gas. There's grid challenges, getting gas really isn't here to stay. That's very much changed in the last, say, 5 years or so, and we're really viewing it now as a destination fuel. It is the pathway to cleaner power, to enabling more renewables on the grid. It is an abundant resource within the U.S. and abroad, and we think that that's kind of the critical step in a long-term, low-carbon economy. So just looking a little deeper at some natural gas dynamics, if you think about gas, how it pertains to the power industry, there are many questions that get asked. The first is there enough of it that this is a reliable resource? And then the next questions are, well, how much does it cost and what is the carbon footprint? So addressing the supply issue, Addressing the supply issue, it is a global resource. If you look at this graph right here, this shows how gas supply has changed globally. So any country that is highlighted in gray has been able to replace the amount of natural gas that it used via new discoveries. Anything that is highlighted in red is a decrease, and you'll note that there's only, 2-3 countries that have actually decreased their total reserves of natural gas. Anything that is a shade of blue represents an upgrade in natural gas. So you can see the bulk of the United States, Canada, much of Asia, Russia. Not only have we replaced what we've used, we've found more. And this is just continuing to grow throughout the world. The next piece here is kind of balancing cost and carbon. Obviously, nuclear, wind, solar are very low carbon options, but what do they look like in terms of cost? Not just cost of electricity, but capital intensity also. So if you see nuclear is going to be that big giant red bubble, the size of the bubble indicates how capital intensive of a project it is. So its cost of electricity is quite low once that plant is online, but it's very, very capital intensive, but also very low carbon. If you look at your other alternatives to nuclear or renewables, you really come down to coal and natural gas. The natural gas opportunities are going to be the blue bubbles, the coal ones are the gray bubbles. And you can see that when you include storage, which are the ones kind of closer to the nuclear bubble, it's more capital intensive and your cost of electricity is going to be higher. If you look at where natural gas falls at about the, say, 600 to 800 life cycle carbon intensity metric, you see it's significantly less than coal, but it also has a very competitive cost of electricity and is one of the things that we see being critical to supporting more renewables on the grid. The last part here is what has natural gas already done for the power industry today? The graph down there on the bottom left is from EIA, and it takes a study that they did in 1998 and compares it to what actually happened. So in 1998, EIA looked at 8 years worth of history from 1990 to 1998 and said, what have our carbon dioxide emissions looked like and where do we think they're going? So you can see the first 8 years of that graph starting at 1990, the green line is your actual carbon dioxide emissions, and the red line was where EIA thought it was going to be by 2010, another 12 years out. The green line is where it actually went. And you can see how far by 2010 that green line is from that red line. Almost all of that is driven by switching from coal to natural gas or building natural gas combined cycle plants instead of building new coal plants. Some of it is from energy efficiency also, but a great deal of that change has simply been things that made economic sense, which was using natural gas. Harvard also did a study kind of trying to quantify how much, by region, how much reduction in total CO2 emissions is attributable to using natural gas for power generation instead of coal. So they break it down by region. You can see the mountain region where we are dropped about 4% of their emissions, expected emissions, by using natural gas instead of coal. If you move over to the East Coast, there are many regions that are in double-digit emissions reductions just by the economic drivers, not by policy regulations. This next couple slides talk about a study that GE Energy Consulting did with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory here in Colorado. They were commissioned in 2009 to do the study for the West Connect, which was a 5-state region including Colorado. It's Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Nevada, to understand is it operationally feasible for that footprint of 5 states to accommodate 30% wind penetration and 5% solar. So the wind would primarily be Colorado, Wyoming, and then northern New Mexico and Arizona, and the solar resources would be found in Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona. So you can see the top graph is kind of the base case scenario here. This is 10% renewable penetration, so this is a very, very low level of renewable penetration relative to where even most of these states are today. And you can see what the impact is on other plants. So nuclear plants, kind of representing that black line at the bottom there, there's no impact. That's going to be your pure baseload fuel. It runs all of the time. The coal plants is the next level there, which is the gray area. And you can see that by and large, with 10% renewables on the grid, there's very little impact to the existing baseload fleet. But then you move up to the combined cycle, which is that purple colored block there, and you can see that having more wind on the grid really causes your combined cycle fleet to cycle more. Well, that was at 10%. What does 20% look like? And that's the next graph down. And you can start to see that that block of wind, that bright green area there, is really cutting into your coal plant operation. The amount of wind on the grid, in order to accommodate it, it's actually forcing coal plants to cycle to be able to allow that wind to stay online. The study actually went further and looked full on at 30%, and you'll see just an even more drastic impact to the coal plant or the traditional base load fleet. So what does this mean for enabling more renewables on the grid? I think the key is kind of highlighted in red there, is that there needs to be an increased volume of flexible, dispatchable generation to accommodate those renewables. And where we really see the future heading is as that coal plant retires, whether it's for economic reasons or environmental reasons, we see it making sense to replace it with natural gas combined cycle generation. It can act as a purely baseload fuel during those time periods when the wind is not blowing and there is a lot of power needed on the grid, but it also has the capability to turn down or shut down and restart rapidly when needed when the wind is blowing. This study was done back in 2009, but GE actually did an update of it just a few months ago to try and understand the cycling impact piece of the equation. And when you put more and more renewables on the grid and you cause your coal plants or your combined cycle plants or your peaking plants to cycle, what does that cost translate to for the generator owners as well as for the consumers? So if you look at the no wind scenario to a 30% wind penetration scenario, the number of turn down events, meaning my plant was operating at base load and now I have to turn it down as low as it'll go, nearly doubled from the no wind scenario. And most of that impact was on the natural gas combined cycle fleet. At 30% wind penetration, system level costs increased between 150 million to 450 million, again, just for that 5-state footprint. So this doesn't represent, what every single state in the US would see. And they also found that additional cycling costs actually erodes some of the value of that renewable energy because you're having to make whole payments or perhaps more maintenance on plants that are cycling very, very heavily. You can see the top graph there is the total number of turndowns in each of the different scenarios, 10%, 20%, 30%. And the biggest impact is on the fleet right there in the middle, which is the natural gas combined cycle fleet. There was also the increase in total cycling costs by unit type, and you can see again that the biggest impact was to the natural gas combined cycle fleet. So what are we as GE doing about that? We're seeing from all of these studies and where the power industry is headed is that more and more renewables are coming onto the grid. Coal is likely going away, or at least not going to be built for the foreseeable future. So what does our technology need to do? It needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to start up quickly and very reliably, have fast ramping capability, reduce overall emissions to maintain compliance with existing and potential new EPA regulations, maintain emissions compliance during all of these cyclic and transient operation modes, have lower turndown capability to accommodate more renewables on the grid, improve part load efficiency, which is where we find plants operating a great deal of the time. They're not operating at base load like they used to. They're operating somewhere somewhat lower than that. And then hot day performance and fuel flexibility are also key. So to that end, GE recently introduced our Flex Efficiency 60 power plant. The Flex Efficiency 60 is a portfolio of gas turbines, steam turbines, and generators that you can put together to make a combined cycle or even a simple cycle power plant. The one that I'm going to talk about here is what we're calling our 7F7 series gas turbine. And this is what it would look like if it was in a 2-on-1, 2 gas turbines, 1 steam turbine combined cycle configuration. So the efficiency of that plant is greater than 61%. If you look just 10 years ago when there was kind of a big bubble of building in the US, the average combined cycle power plant was probably about 4 points less than that, perhaps in the 56 to 57% range. The output of that plant is about 750 megawatts. Each gas turbine is 250, and then another 250 contribution from the steam turbine side. It has rapid startup capability. We've been doing a whole lot of things on the kind of the balance of plant side, which I'll talk about in a minute, to enable more power on the grid in a shorter period of time. What that does is not only increase the amount of megawatts that you have in a short period of time, say 10 minutes when wind suddenly goes away, but it also enables you to use less fuel on a startup, which is an emissions savings. We've also found from, again, kind of responding to load variability or generation variability, that ramping is critical. So this plant ramps at 100 megawatts a minute. That's 50 megawatts per gas turbine, so that doesn't include whatever contribution you might get from the steam turbine. And operating range is key. We found that utilities that have a large volume of wind penetration like to have a combined cycle power plant that can stay online overnight while the wind is blowing in case it suddenly goes away, or load ramps up a little earlier in the morning than they thought it would. So this plant can turn down to 14% of base load. So that's about 100 megawatts out of the 750 that it's capable of doing at base load. What that means is one gas turbine is off, one gas turbine is on, operating at 20% load. And then stack emissions are at 2 ppm NOx and CO using an SCR or CO catalyst. I was going to talk a little bit about the fast starting capability. This is an area where we really see a lot of potential and a lot more customer interest on the combined cycle side of the equation. So if you think about how a typical combined cycle plant starts up, you've got your 2 gas turbines and they start up first, and usually they have a hold point where they have to run at a lower level in order to allow the bottoming cycle, which is the heat recovery steam generator and the steam turbine, to come up to temperature, and then the whole plant can kind of come up together. So what we have done is decoupled those gas turbines, which have the ability to start very rapidly, and the bottoming cycle, the steam turbine, which doesn't necessarily have the ability to start very rapidly, to kind of taken those two apart so that you're enabling more power in a shorter period of time. So that's changes to some of these, what we call the balance of plant systems, your heat recovery steam generator. We use some steam attemperation, bypass control. There's a lot of controls changes, and what that really does is separates those two components. So essentially what happens is you are allowing for your full output, all 750 megawatts, in less than 30 minutes. You're synced to the grid within 6. Both of your gas turbines are up at 100% in 10, so that's 500 megawatts available in 10 minutes, and you're reducing your startup emissions. So if you look at this graph, I think it explains it well. You have a conventional start is shown as that green line there. So you can see that under a conventional starting situation, you don't have any megawatts available to the grid until about minute 25. This is because you're doing a purge, a nitrogen purge on the front end there, but mostly because you're doing that purge, and then you have to start up your gas turbines after that. So you start up the gas turbines, and in order to allow the bottoming cycle to heat up, those gas turbines are operating at a very, very low load, maybe 10 or 15%. It is not an emissions compliant load. So they're not operating at a point where they're at that 2 ppm at the stack. They're operating at a point where they're significantly higher than that. And then once your steam turbine is hot, then you can come up all of the way, and minute 70 or so, you've got 100% output. What we've done in this rapid response is you do your purge on shutdown, but you're allowing your gas turbines to essentially immediately come up to full load and avoid that hold point. So there's a huge emissions savings on the startup. You not only have more megawatts in a shorter period of time, but you release fewer tons of NOx, fewer tons of CO, all of which kind of tie back to your ability to operate within your power plant's perhaps permit limits. So this plant can now have a 0.5 gigawatt of power available in 10 minutes. 10, 15 years ago, that was unheard of for a combined cycle plant. That was something you pretty much solely did with simple cycle peaking technology, and we've really kind of taken it to the next level, enabling natural gas to not just be a baseload power plant, but also to be a very fast responding resource also. A lot of that was done via control changes. I won't get into the details of it, but a big one, particularly as it pertains to some natural gas dynamics, is there's been some control enhancements that enable a wider fuel range. Our latest gas turbine has been designed for a plus or minus 15% modified Wabi index variability, which is designed to accommodate the entire range of potential LNG LNG technology. So as LNG perhaps becomes prevalent in the U.S. at some time in the future, the latest generation of combined cycle technology is prepared to respond and reliably use that fuel source. So kind of just wrapping up here, we see gas generation as being key to supporting flexibility, supporting more renewables on the grid, really being the kind of the way of the future in terms of where we need to go for clean energy, for reliable energy. It has all of the things that utilities like to see, power generators like to see, fast and reliable starting capability, fast ramping capability, high efficiency both at base load and part load, and low turndown capability. All of this enables combined cycle generation to accommodate cyclic operation and again, more renewables on the power grid. So where GE really sees kind of the market going is that natural gas is an abundant and low-cost fuel for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of demanding grid requirements. Many states have renewable portfolio standards now, and this increasing level of renewable penetration puts more and more onus on equipment manufacturers like GE to have products that can perform in that space. The new plan also has obviously excellent efficiency and operational flexibility and is hopefully setting a new standard for combined cycle start time and flexible performance. What I didn't address in here, and I can just touch on very briefly, is that this looked at kind of the heavy-duty power generation cycle. This is 750 megawatt plants designed to replace coal plants. These are not small power generation facilities, but there are many, many opportunities out there at a distributed power level, perhaps combined heat and power or cogeneration at manufacturing facilities, where there is a lot of potential in the future for a manufacturer to own their own small gas turbine, use the exhaust energy from that for their process steam needs, and also get an electricity benefit out of that, and perhaps replace an older natural gas fired or waste fuel fired boiler at their site. So I think that was all I had. I'll turn it over to
Thank you, Claire.
Okay, so you've been sitting out there all day wondering how bright these lights really are. So it's going to be my job to try to reflect some of that back to you, give you an idea just how bad this is. But no, seriously, congratulations. You made it to the end, your last speaker. So thank you for your tenacity, or alternately, thank you to your airline for refusing to book your flight for you. I am Paul Harder. I'm the president and CEO at Aqua Heating Systems. I'm also a board member for the Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Alliance. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to come out here and shed the steel-toe boots and the safety glasses and demonstrate to CAMA's president that, Tim, I actually do own at least one tie and can reasonably tie it. If you Google American manufacturing renaissance, you're going to get tons of hits on what's going on in the country right now. And I've got to tell you, I'm a little bit of a manufacturing geek. We got to hear from our data nerd, now you're going to get boxed in by the manufacturing geek. I've got to tell you that our story here in the United States, in this renaissance, manufacturing exports are growing at 7 times the rate of our GDP growth to their highest level now in 50 years. At the rate we're going, we're going to capture another $70 to $115 billion in manufacturing exports from our competitive nations in the next decade. Factors that are feeding into this are higher productivity, which is a combination of literally higher productivity and competitive wages, and also lower energy costs. Now, this is my slide to tell you that I know that you know this stuff already, okay? But 10x increase in shale gas production in the last 10 years, on pace to double again by 2035, and that's given us an advantage of 3 to 4 times the cost of NG in our competitive nations in Europe and Japan. Now, how does that impact manufacturing? It's going to impact manufacturing in 2 principal ways. First, it's going to hit to feedstock. About 7 to 10% of the natural gas that's used by manufacturers today is used to make something else. They take the natural gas and they make everything from tires to toys out of this stuff. In looking up some stats and getting ready for this presentation today, I came across 2 great reports, one by the Boston Consulting Group, thanks to Tim Heaton at CAMA, and another by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which I believe has already been quoted a couple of times today. The most common manufactured industrial chemical in the world today is ethylene. Right now in the United States, you can produce a ton of ethylene for about $300. If you go out to one of our competitive nations in Europe or Asia, you're going to find that that same ton of ethylene is going to cost anywhere from $500 to $1,700. So at a minimum, we've got manufacturers looking at a 40% advantage in pricing on their feedstock and upwards of 3 times that much. The other obvious impact is on the energy side. You know, we've heard a lot of information today about gas-fired power plants, and the reality of that is that those gas-fired power plants allow us today to have industrial electricity rates that are anywhere from 60 to 300% lower in the United States than they are in areas of Europe and Asia where we compete with manufactured goods. And we've got a lot of cast-dependent processes out there. Over 40% of the natural gas used by manufacturers today is used in their primary process. It's used in casting metals. You know, when Alcoa casts a 90,000-pound ingot of aluminum, they use a lot of gas to accomplish that. You also see that in heat treating, curing, textile and paper production. Now, to tell you a little bit more about why I'm here, Aquahot Heating Systems, now in Frederick, Colorado, is a born and raised 30-year-old manufacturer. What we manufacture are engine-off heating systems, primarily for the RV industry, but I'm going to show you a slide that shows how we're branching out with the advent of natural gas. We were founded in Brighton, Colorado. We spent a little over 22 years in Fort Lupton, Colorado, and just recently, thanks to the fact that there's a lot of oil and gas boom up there and we sold our land in Fort Lupton for a nice penny, we've moved to a new facility in Frederick, Colorado, just north of here. The bus that you see here in the corner is manufactured by one of our primary customers. In this case, this one's made by Winnebago. That's about a $500,000 Winnebago tour there. So if you take a look at the RV market where hydronic heating is prevalent, that's heating with hot fluid, you'll find that of the vehicles that offer hydronic heating, we've got a 98% market share. So the next time you see one of these big monsters rolling down the road, you can pretty well rest assured that the heating system in that thing was made right here in Colorado. Our proprietary technology allows us to take the fuel on board the vehicle, and today it doesn't matter whether that fuel is diesel, whether it's natural gas, or whether it's propane. We can bring that fuel into our system, burn that fuel, and heat a glycol reservoir, and then pump that glycol throughout the vehicle for whatever that vehicle's engine-off heating needs are. Traditionally, we've done this when a diesel engine doesn't cold start very well in a cold environment, or where an RV needs heating in the cabin, or for domestic water for their sink, shower, dishwasher, clothes washer, jacuzzi tub, whatever other amenity they can think of on these coaches that cost upwards of $1 million. But today, as we moved into the work truck segment, we're finding that we're also heating auxiliary systems like hydraulic systems. Up until about 2 years ago, the RV market was our bread and butter. We manufactured products and supplied them to 40 OEMs with names that you've heard of like Winnebago and some that you probably haven't like Newell. But across this whole range, we focused on diesel and then recently propane-fired solutions for RVs. And then about 2 years ago, we got a phone call from Canada. It turns out that a large Canadian gas utility that some of you probably know called Enbridge had made the decision to change their whole service fleet over to natural gas-fired vehicles. Now, these service vehicles will go out to a job site where they'll dwell from anywhere from a couple of hours to an all-day shift with people working in the vehicle and around the vehicle and temperatures as low as 40 below zero. They needed an engine-off heating solution. Not only did they have the challenge of transferring their fleet to natural gas, they also had the challenge of meeting anti-idle legislation in Canada that only allows these service vehicles to idle for about 10 minutes before they're forced to shut them off. So they had to come up with a way to heat this vehicle. Now, initially, they were going to take this natural gas vehicle, and they were going to put a little pony tank on it, and fill it up with diesel fuel, and put a diesel heater on it, and they thought about that and said, that's exactly what we're going to do. No, it's not. We're a natural gas utility. There's got to be a better solution. So they got a hold of their vehicle upfitter, and in this chain of purchasing vehicles like this, there's a secondary manufacturer who'll put the fuel system on, build the box, et cetera. They went to this upfitter and said, you've got to come up with an alternative to diesel. Got to heat this some other way. And as it turns out, the guy that owned that company owned an RV. And he said, I wonder how my RV's heated. And he went out and looked, and guess what he found? He found a propane-fired Aquahot heater in the belly of that RV. And he got on the phone and he called down to us here in Colorado and he said, hey guys, can you make one of those burn natural gas? And fortunately for me, he talked to the right employee on my team that said, sure. And so just so you know, two of our favorite sayings in our engineering department at Aquahot are, why don't you just, and all you got to do is. And so after 8 months of going through why don't you just, and all you got to do is, we produced our first natural gas heating system, and it went on this truck. And you can actually see it in this photo, just to the right of the fellow in the black shirt there. That little white box that's in the toolbox on the side of the truck is an AquaHot natural gas-fired heating system. Now, initially, 2 of these went into beta test up in Canada, and they've done so well with them, and the cost per mile on operating these vehicles has come down so dramatically that now Enbridge has told us that they're going to outfit their entire fleet with AquaHot heating systems. We've also done some beta testing here, and some of the previous slides actually showed pictures of our customers. There's a picture of the big concrete truck from Johnstown Ready Mix. They're a customer of ours. We're preheating their engine and preheating the hydraulic systems. And there was a picture of Western Disposal's trucks in Boulder, Colorado, and we're doing the same thing there. We preheat the engine, the cab, and the hydraulic system on that vehicle so that when they come in, that truck is ready to go. Rather than bring a crew in at 2 o'clock in the morning and walk around the yard for 3 hours, starting these trucks every 10 minutes because the engine control unit shuts them off after 10 minutes of idling. Now, the AquaHot wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning on a timer, checks the ambient temperature outside, and if it's below 40 degrees, the burner kicks on, pumps come on, and when the driver arrives at 5 o'clock to dispatch, the engine's warm, the cab's warm, the hydraulics are warm, they jump in and take off. So we're seeing the transportation industry changing rapidly. I was recently at the National Truck and Equipment Association show in Indianapolis, and you couldn't look anywhere without seeing that apple green natural gas logo. All the major OEMs have it. You've seen that in presentations earlier. We're seeing these fleets move rapidly over to this technology. As quickly as we can solve their related technological problems, they're going over to natural gas. One of our customers let me know, I saw one of the risk factors to continued growth in natural gas vehicles was the price of these vehicles. So I went to one of these fleet managers and I said, tell me about price. Tell me how you offset that. And he shared with me that even after he amortizes the additional cost of the natural gas vehicle and the cost of the filling station necessary to fuel those vehicles, he still reduced his operating cost per mile by 50%. So there are significant gains to be made out there. He went on to tell me, he said, anybody that's operating a fleet of heavy trucks that can come home to a fueling station every night that's not on natural gas is crazy. And that particular customer is Western Disposal in Boulder, and they've made the commitment to begin to transition their whole fleet, as we heard earlier, and they've also made the commitment to have AquaHot natural gas heating systems on those. So literally from the lifestyles of the rich and famous at coaches that run anywhere from $500,000 to $1.2 million to your neighborhood garbage truck, we're seeing natural gas changing the face of this heavy equipment transportation marketplace, and we're changing and growing rapidly to keep up with that. Thank you for your time. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you about our company, and thanks for the chance to get out of the shop.
Well, I very much appreciate those still in the room, so you all need to give yourself an applause, all of the participants today. I know everybody's ready to get home, but I do have one question as a marketer that I want to ask our panelists. We've heard a lot today about how we are demand constrained. We've heard a lot about technology on the drilling side, our commitment to safe and responsible development, but how that innovation and technology is really creating more natural gas than what we have demand for. You've heard a lot, even from Governor Hickenlooper, about the environmental advantages as we use more and more natural gas. There's a lot of statistics right now by the Congressional Research Service that if we doubled the operating capacity of the combined cycle units, just those that are already in the United States, more operating at a 40% capacity factor, that would reduce carbon emissions by 8%. We've heard a lot about, even in this region in the West, we have a lot of pipeline infrastructure that is not being used because we do have the Marcellus and we have the Northeast. So we have a lot more opportunity to use natural gas within this region and within Colorado. So the question that I would have of each of our panelists, speaking from advice to our industry, if natural gas is really going to create all those jobs and continue to benefit the producers that we represent to continue to drill and to ramp up production within this region, Frank, I would ask you from an Xcel, from a utility standpoint, what do we really have to do as an industry, not only to have more megawatts installed, that's great, but our industry wants to make sure that those megawatts are used on a volumetric basis. So I would ask you what challenges you think our industry has, and then also, Luke, if you could talk about from pipeline infrastructure, if we were to see those generating units and many of those manufacturing plants expand, kind of talk about whether we have adequate infrastructure in this region, what policies we may need to ensure that infrastructure continues to build out. And I'm going to ask Claire to talk about from a technology standpoint, in order for her company to increase sales of those combined cycle units, is it going to take a 70 or 80% efficient unit because we don't see gas prices dropping beneath $3 on a sustained basis? And then finally, I'd like to hear from Paul in order to, for his, looking at his own company, and looking at hydronic heating units, what does he really see that our industry needs to do in order to support growth in his business? So I'm going to pass, each of them already has a microphone. We're going to start with Frank.
Well, the question is, how can, it was a long time ago, Michelle, so the question is how can natural gas continue to grow as a utility fuel? I'll say two things. Number one is price matters, and the low price is going to cause it to continue to grow, as I said before, because of public policy and because of price and because of aging infrastructure across the nation. Natural gas and renewables are the kings and queens right now of the utility generation sector. I think that's going to continue to happen no matter what. The one thing that can interfere with that is public policy stopping this market from going forward, either because it stops our access to shale gas, or, and I'm sure we've had quite a few discussions today about fracking, and thereby raises the price, or because you have public policy coming in on the back end and preventing us from using natural gas because of, for example, very tight carbon caps. That's why I was trying to do a little bit of a commercial for the right kind of climate policy, because while you look at climate policy and you think, well, that's going to go after coal, in the short term that's probably true, but in the long term the reality is natural gas also emits carbon dioxide, albeit at a lesser rate. If you have the wrong kind of public policy from the point of view of carbon, you're going to have it affect not only coal-fired generation but also gas. So doing it the right way, and we think we got a pretty good solution here, doing it the right way is very important to making sure that gas markets continue to be there and gas continues to be an important part of our energy generation mix.
So I think my question was related to pipeline infrastructure and the availability of the infrastructure to meet some of the growing demand. And let me just say, being at Bentech, we definitely do a lot of analysis looking at pipeline flows and whatnot throughout the Rockies region and really across the whole U.S. I'm fairly familiar with that, and let me say there is plenty sufficient pipeline capacity and infrastructure within the Rockies region to meet some of the growing demand. I know one of the bigger issues right now within the Rockies is getting some of that gas that is being produced, particularly out in the DJ Basin, and getting that gas out to market and on pipelines. And there's a significant build out of processing infrastructure, at least on that side, to help get that gas to market. So for one, there's definitely a lot of processing expansions going on within the region. And then on the demand side, like I said, plenty of available capacity on pipelines across the Rockies to move the gas to market to meet some of the growing sources of demand. And as I said at the end of my presentation, the big thing with the Rockies is not so much the demand growth within the region, but more outside of the region, particularly in markets in the West. And interesting, that's one thing that we've discussed a lot with a number of our clients and in our reports that we put out, is that there is some constraints in terms of pipeline infrastructure moving Rockies gas out to the Western markets. So that's one thing to keep in mind going forward. But in terms of Rockies demand locally within the region, definitely sufficient pipeline capacity to help meet some of the growing demand on the industrial and power sectors within the region.
So I think my question was about what needs to happen in order to have more natural gas combined cycle units out there in the market. So I think what's interesting, I think, you mentioned, do you need something that's 70 or 80% efficient when gas is $3? What we've actually found is that in the U.S., there isn't a high value placed on efficiency. What seems to be the driver is all of these other things that natural gas can do besides be very, very efficient. So I think from our standpoint, a couple things need to happen. The first is on the consumer side of the equation. And by consumer, I mean the person building the power plant, the owner, the operator, the builder. There are some owner-operator builders who don't see a value for flexible combined cycle generation. They see more of a value focused solely on base load or solely on peaking and not so much across the spectrum of one plant that can do a variety of things. And I think that will change as the landscape changes, as environmental restrictions become heavier or more renewables are on the grid. The other piece of it is the policy side of the equation. If you look at a lot of the, whether it's a state level or a federal level policy, they kind of draw a box around how you're allowed to operate. And there's also this idea that, once there is a plant like ours that's 61% efficient, you should only ever be able to build a 61% efficient plant again. There should never be a need for a plant that's only 55% efficient. And you're kind of talking yourselves into a box of only allowing one type of natural gas technology. And I think that that's very scary for our industry because, you look at a grid like, say, in Arizona, where they've only got 2,000 megawatts worth of peak load. You can't have a 750 megawatt plant serving 2,000 megawatts. That represents too high of a percentage of their total capabilities. So I think the policy side and making sure that the environmental regulations, while they may have good intent, don't box you into a corner of what type of natural gas technology is really the best fit, and that'll enable the generator to make the right decision for their grid and their situation.
It's hard to argue with the dollars and cents when you go out and talk to a fleet operator. That's where their minds are. But I'm going to take a little different tact. If you look at these stats and you look at the opportunity to bring all these manufactured goods back to the United States, a significant risk in that from a manufacturer's standpoint is, will we have the skilled labor force to fill those 1 million to 2.5 million jobs, depending on whose reports you've read. Now, recently there was a great piece of forward-looking legislation that made its way through the legislature here in Colorado, establishing manufacturing credentials at all state-funded schools in the state. And so CAMA, with Tim Heaton's help, has been working with the Department of Labor and Employment on establishing that curriculum and delivering that curriculum. Now, similarly, I would issue a challenge to the natural gas industry to say that there are significant technological issues that you may not be aware of or you might even take for granted for those of us that are trying to deploy these technologies in the field. And we need your help. We need you to partner with us to increase our depth of understanding on these technological issues. For example, we're struggling right now with the regional variability and BTU rating of natural gas. When we're out there establishing systems to run optimally on this particular region's BTU rating at this particular region's altitude, and then we go out to Illinois at 800 feet above sea level, we're having some technological problems, and we need help with that. And undoubtedly, the fleet operators, the fleet drivers, they need similar training and similar awareness on the safety and technical side as well. So anywhere you can reach out and partner for that educational effort, I think that would be a big plus.
All right, well, I know that you guys are ready to call it a day. I definitely think we had some outstanding presentations, and so give a round of applause to all of our panelists. And I am from War Eagle, Birmingham, Alabama. So with that, we very much appreciate your patience at the end of the day, and I'm going to turn it over to Pam Roth.
Well, thanks again, Michelle, and all the panelists for your thoughtful and very informative presentations. I'm sorry more people couldn't enjoy that information. It was very informative. Well, we sincerely thank you for your attendance today. Thanks for hanging in there till the very end. Please let us know if you have any outstanding questions on the information shared today. And this concludes the America's Natural Gas Alliance Think About It Energy Summit. Thank you.